Canto 32. Summary. After gazing on Mary, the queen of this realm, Bernard turns his attention to the other saints who are seated around her, and begins to identify those whom Dante is seeing. Eve, the one who opened and administered the wound that Mary closed and anointed, sits beneath her. Beneath Eve sits Rachel, with Beatrice beside her. Following the line downward from Rachel are Sarah, Rebecca, Judith, and Ruth, the great-grandmother of David. These 7 Hebrew women form a boundary line between the two halves of the rose. On one side sit those saints from before the time of Christ. That side of the rose is completely full. The other side, which is spotted with vacant seats here and there, sit those from the era of the Christian Church. Just as on either side of Mary the halves are divided, so too on the opposite side of the rose sits John the Baptist, with Francis, Benedict, and Augustine beneath him. The vertical lines of these women and men divide the rose into its two halves. Horizontally, from the middle tier that runs around the whole rose and downward, are the infants and children who died before they had the power of reason. Whether they were covered by their parents' faith in the earliest ages, from Adam to Abraham, or by circumcision, from Abraham to Christ, or by baptism from then on, they are here not by their own merit. At this point, the pilgrim sees an angel wing downward toward Mary singing Ave Maria, which the whole rose echoes back. This is Gabriel, who is given the distinction by the poet as having the greatest amount of exaltation and joy among all rational beings. And this, Bernard says, is right, for he was chosen to bring the message to Mary that the Christ would soon be born. Then he points out on Mary's left Adam and Moses, and on her right Peter and John. Anne, the mother of Mary, is on the right side of John the Baptist, and Lucy, who left her seat to beseech Beatrice to help Dante, see Inferno 2, is seated to his left. Deeming this identification sufficient for the time Dante has remaining, Bernard tells him to now lift his eyes to God, to see as much of him as grace will allow. But first, that grace must be asked for in prayer, and so he makes ready to ask Mary. This canto ends in expectation of the prayer that begins the following one. Canto 32. Empyrean. With love for his joy, the admiring one assumed the generous role of teacher, and began to utter these holy words. The wound that Mary closed and anointed, she who is so beautiful sitting there at her feet, opened and administered. In the ordering that makes the third tier, Rachel is situated beneath her, with Beatrice, such as you can perceive. Sarah and Rebecca, Judith, and she who was great-grandmother to the singer, who for sin cried Miserere mei, can thus be seen descending rank by rank to the floor, as I with each of their names go down through the rose petal by petal. And down from the 7th rank as upward, parting all the petals of the flower, the Hebrew women follow in a line. For according to the way that faith looked to Christ, these women are the wall by which the sacred steps of this rose are parted. On this side, where the flower is mature, with all its petals full, are seated those who believed in the Christ who was to come. On the other, where the semicircle is interspersed with vacant seats, remain those who kept their eyes on the Christ who came. And as on this side the glorious seat of Heaven's Lady and the other seats underneath her make such a division, so too opposite her sits the great John, who, always holy, suffered the desert and martyrdom, and then for 2 years hell. Beneath him, to such it fell to divide. Francis and Benedict and Augustine, and others down to here from wheel to wheel. Now gaze upon high providence divine, for the one and the other face of faith will fill this garden in equal measure. And know that downward from the tier that cuts the rose through the middle of the two halves, these are seated not by their own merit, but by others, under fixed conditions. For all these are the spirits who were loosed before they had the power of true choice. Indeed, you can see this by their faces, and by their young childlike voices as well, if you look closely at them and listen. Now you doubt, and doubting remain silent, but I will dissolve for you the strong bond in which your subtle thoughts are binding you. Within the abundance of this kingdom, no chance speck is able to find a place any more than sadness, thirst, or hunger. For by eternal laws established whatsoever you see, such that rightly here the ring corresponds to the finger. And therefore these people, rushed to new life, are in this place, and not without reason, more or less excellent among themselves. The king through whom this kingdom finds its rest, in love so great and in such great delight, that no will would dare to ask for aught else, creating all minds in his happy sight, gives grace differently to his own pleasure, and here let the effect be sufficient. This is expressly and clearly revealed to you in Holy Scriptures, in those twins who were stirred to wrath in their mother's womb. According to the color of the hair of grace, therefore, it is necessary that the highest light crowns them fittingly, and so, without merit from any deeds, they are placed along the various tiers, only differing in primal sharpness. In the earliest ages of the world, the faith of the parents alone sufficed, along with innocence, for salvation. When those earliest ages were complete, it was necessary the males gained strength for innocent wings through circumcision. But after the time of grace had arrived, without the perfect baptism of Christ, such innocent babes were kept there below. Upon the face which most resembles Christ now look, for her bright clarity alone is able to prepare you to see Christ. I saw rain down on her so much gladness, carried along upon the holy minds created to fly across that great height, that whatsoever I had seen before held me not in suspense with such great awe, nor showed me so great a semblance of God. And the love that came down to her, singing Ave Maria gratia plene, spread his wings wide open in front of her. From every region of that blessed court that divine canticle was so answered that every face became more luminous. O Holy Father, who deigns for my sake to be here below, leaving that sweet place where you are seated by eternal lot, who is that angel who with so much joy is gazing upon the eyes of our Queen, so enamored he seems to be of fire? Thus I turned once again to the teaching of him who was being adorned by Mary, just as the sun adorns the morning star. And he to me, Exultation and joy are all in him, as much as can be found, in angel or soul, and such we desire, for he is that one who carried the palm downward to Mary, when the Son of God willed to burden himself with our body. But now follow with your eyes as I go, speaking and noting the great patricians of this most righteous and pious empire. Those two that sit there above, happiest for residing nearest to Augusta, are, in a sense, like two roots to this rose. He that is next to her on the left side is the Father by whose insolent taste the human species tastes such bitterness. Behold on her right the ancient Father of the Holy Church, to whom Christ vouchsafed the keys of this most beautiful flower. And he who bore witness before he died to all the heavy times of that fair bride, who was acquired with the lance and the nails, sits by him. By the other the leader takes his rest, under whom lived on manna the ungrateful, fickle, stiff-necked people. Opposite to Peter, see Anna sit, so content to gaze upon her daughter, she moves not her eyes to sing Hosanna. And opposite to the greatest father of kin sits Lucy, who moved your lady when you were setting your face to ruin. But because the time entrancing you flees, let us end here, just as a good tailor who cuts the cloak from the fabric he has. Let us turn our eyes to the primal love, such that gazing at him you may pierce through as far as you can into his splendor. But, lest perhaps you draw yourself backward, moving your wings, thinking to enter in, by prayer must grace for this be entreated. Grace from her who is able to help you. Thus follow after me with affection, such that your heart departs not from my speech. And so he began this holy appeal.